going to go to our next question now from Amy Brown.
There is a sentence that has been rolling around in my head and in my soul since Jim Chalmers delivered his budget speech. And that sentence was, we've done what we could afford. As a millennial and a young person, I am so tired of feeling like I am screaming into a political void here where we are not taken seriously. At what point are you going to stop acting on behalf of corporations and businesses and start acting on behalf of the people that put you in those seats?
I'll go to Michelle in a minute, but David, I'll put that one to you first. You're now in politics, you're up close to this. Is that what you see? More interest in the big end of town than ordinary people?
Look, I think there are so many good people in there wanting to represent their communities. I think often the line that they have to toe that the major parties come up with doesn't suit that. And I think it's one of the clearest
So do you agree with
examples.
Amy that people like Amy are being ignored and the big end of town is getting the rewards?
Well, I think housing is a great example of this. When it comes to defence and submarines, we hear that we cannot afford not to spend money on this. But we're not hearing the same urgency and priority when it comes to people in our communities, when it comes to health, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to housing. So I do think we're seeing that play out. Sorry, Amy, you.
There are a couple of places where we could make money back, though. PRRT, I call it Purity, so I remember the acronym.
The resource rent tax?
Yeah.
Which has been increased.
Yeah,
Wow.
but it hasn't been...
Well, he says,
Yeah.
not enough, you say.
Yeah, but it needs to be increased so that the people that are harvesting gas and oil and taking it overseas actually pay taxes here in Australia so that we can contribute back and give social services what they need.
Yep.
Just what are you...
Yeah?
So that would be great.
Yeah.
That's a good point. There's a couple of things that I want to say, though.
Yep.
69% of inflation is driven by excess corporate price gouging. Mm-hmm. Right now, that is what is driving it. Mm-hmm. So guess what happens? We have a reactionary response, which is to bump up interest rates. Guess what happens next? Who's announcing the profits next?
The banks.
The banks are announcing the profits. You know what? I am so unbelievably sick of these things, these reactions that are trying to control inflation, and we're trying to slow down the economy, and we can't find money. Oh, we've got money for stage 3 tax cuts, but we can't find money. We're going to keep upping the interest rate. I spoke to a friend who's at 7.5% interest rate on her mortgage.
This is after 11 interest rate increases.
That's it.
Zoe, stage 3 tax cuts
We could tweak them.
is your party's idea.
Yeah.
How do you justify that?
It is, and may I say I was surprised I heard Jim Chalmers endorse stage 3 tax cuts on insiders the week after the budget and say they were necessary for addressing bracket creep. But can I go to your main point about millennials?
But it's not just bracket creep. It is people
I'm
on
just saying what Jim said. I'm just
$200,000
saying
a
what you
year.
said. Look, anyone
Your party's policy, which Labor has now inherited.
$45,000 a year is better off. But can I say, you make a really good point about millennials, right? I interestingly don't. Sorry, I just hit my mic. I don't hear much from the big end of town at all, actually, but that's because I suppose I'm a pure backbencher. I listen, as a backbencher, I listen to my community all day, every day. I do my best to front up to as many schools as possible. We've got some of the school kids from my electorate here, basically to make sure I'm constantly getting the cold shower of what I need to be thinking about for that generation, right? What it means for 16, 17-year-olds in Australia today, what hope they have for the future, and what we need to be doing to benefit them. The only bank I think I've come across is my community bank that's at every, race run and community fair and everything else. So I hear your frustration, but I try to reassure you that there's most of backbencher engagement is all community engagement. It's not the big end of town at all.
Michelle, Amy's sitting here.
Yeah, Amy, I can see you just...
Can I just say one thing, though? Yep. It's really interesting that you mentioned bracket creep. So I'm an accountant. Bracket creep impacts low and middle income earners. It doesn't impact the top wealthy people.
$200,000. And bracket
creep. We adjusted those brackets was before the global financial crisis, 2008.
So I'll go to you, Michelle, on this, because bracket creep, of course, is when people move up into other tax brackets, and it becomes a disincentive. But can you sit here and tell Amy why this government is still committed at a time when people can't put a roof over their heads to giving people on $200,000 a year an extra $10,000 a year in their pockets when the stage 3 tax cuts come into action?
So, sure.
So Amy's sitting here to tell her why.
Firstly, Amy, I can see your distress, and
it's not distress, it's rage.
I understand. I understand. In my community, half my electorate is under the age of 37. Everywhere you go, there are young people, right?
That wasn't the question. How come you're still committed to the stage 3 tax cuts?
So we legislated these. I mean, these were legislated, and we have made a commitment that we're not going to be repealing them. Or
would you like them to break that promise?
But I will say there is a
them.
dispute over the amount, the quantum. So 300 million has come from the Parliamentary Budget Office. In fact, another economist from the ANU has done an alternative analysis where he has taken the assumption that over time, governments, over a 10-year period, governments, Liberal or Labor, whichever it is, tend to adjust tax thresholds based on bracket creep. And when that analysis was done, and he did it a few years ago, in fact, the amount is 54 billion and it disappears by 2029. So depending on which you want to believe, there are two separate analyses around this. But that doesn't answer your question. At your question, you are telling me that you feel that you've been left behind. There's an entire generation of young people who have been left behind.
It's not me. It's so wild how you keep making things about individuals. I am not talking about me. I am talking about my generation. You want to know why the budget surplus, everyone is so mad about that? You want to know why it's so on the nose? Because it's exactly the same as the banks that have their surplus off the back of interest rate rises.
So
the supermarkets that are having their
the budget surplus.
Stop it.
In delivering a modest budget surplus, what that will actually mean is $83 billion less debt on young shoulders over the next 12 years.
This is really patronising. I'm so sorry.
No,
you
but
are patronising me.
And that's why we have to make it.
David, I'm going to. David's been waiting very patiently. David.
So yes, the question I heard was that we know that a big part of inflation is off the back of corporate profits. You know, for the last year at least, the crossbench has been calling for a windfall profits tax. Gas companies made an extra $40 billion in the last year. The PRRT, the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax that Tammy talked about, the crossbench is saying, lift it. Experts are saying lift it. So
billions of
to
dollars.
date, offshore gas projects in Australia have paid 0 cents of PRRT. They have not paid a single cent. Labor is proposing that they bring some payments forward and that those who are never going to pay any because they have such big investment costs that they get to compound, they'll have a minimum spend. That's what Labor is saying. The Libs are saying, we'll repeal that. Like, this doesn't make sense. You're 100% right. We should be getting a better return on our own resources.
We're going to be transitioning. This country is on the cusp of an energy transformation, which is going to bring unprecedented prosperity to this nation. And that is something, and you should believe
sorry,
it,
Michelle,
because that is actually going to happen.
No amount of spin can change the fact that the stage 3 tax cuts will see every politician in this place get $9,000 extra a year off on their tax when there are people having to choose between putting a roof over their heads or feed their kids. You should be mad. You should be mad. And by the way, the federal budget, on gas tax, the federal budget is making more money charging interest on student debt than it is on changes to the tax,
which is about to go
gas taxes. And the final point is this, that you're exactly right on inflation. You're exactly right. And the Treasury got up and talked about tough choices, as if that budget was tough for him. You know what? It's tough. It's tough for the people choosing between paying the rent and feeding their kids, especially when the big banks announce Westpac record billions of dollars in profit that should be taxed and put towards putting a roof over people's head and making sure they have enough income and food to live a good life.